I think we need some distance. Megan said it casually, like she was talking about changing dinner plans instead of rearranging our entire relationship. We were standing in the kitchen of the apartment we'd been living in for almost a year. It was a Tuesday night, completely ordinary. I was stirring pasta sauce on the stove, the windows were cracked open, and music from my phone was playing quietly on the counter. The kind of normal night that usually fades from memory. But that sentence froze everything. I feel like I'm losing myself in this relationship, she continued, leaning back against the counter with her arms crossed. Her tone was calm, careful, rehearsed. I just need a little space to figure out my life. I turned down the burner and looked at her. She had clearly prepared this speech. People always think you can't tell when someone rehearses a conversation in their head. But you can. The pauses are too perfect. The phrases are too clean. I'm not saying we break up, she added quickly. I just think we should live separately for a while. Get some distance. I need to rediscover who I am. I nodded slowly. Okay. She blinked. Okay? She repeated. Yeah. For a moment she just stared at me like she was waiting for the rest of the reaction. Most people expect a fight when they drop a sentence like that. They expect questions, arguments, negotiations. But none of that came. I just leaned against the counter and folded my arms. If that's what you need, I said calmly, then that's what you need. The silence that followed was strange. She had prepared for resistance. Instead, she got agreement. You're taking this really well, she said cautiously. I'm trying to listen. She studied my face like she was looking for some hidden reaction I wasn't showing yet. Because I don't want you to think this means I don't care about you, she said. I just feel like we've become too dependent on each other. That word stuck out to me. Dependent. Because the truth was, the situation was a little more complicated than that. But I didn't interrupt her. She kept going. I've been thinking about it a lot lately, she said. I just feel like I need to stand on my own feet for a while. Be independent again. I nodded slowly. Fair enough. Another pause. You're not mad? She asked. No. Not even a little? No. And that part was actually true. Because while she had clearly been thinking about this conversation for weeks, I had been noticing something about our relationship for months. Something I hadn't really said out loud yet. Megan loved talking about independence. It was one of her favorite topics. She talked about it with her friends. She talked about it on Instagram. She talked about it during long late-night conversations when we were discussing our future. She liked the idea of being someone who didn't rely on anyone. Someone who built their own life. Someone strong. Someone independent. But the reality of our day-to-day life didn't exactly match that story. The apartment we were standing in, the lease was in my name. The internet, my account. The electricity, also mine. The streaming services we used every night, Netflix, Spotify, 2 different movie platforms, all paid automatically from my card. Even the cloud software Megan used for her freelance design work was something I had added to my monthly subscriptions because she said it would help her business. When we first moved in together, the plan had been simple. Split everything 50-50. At the beginning, that's more or less what we did. Then her freelance work hit what she called a temporary slow period. 1 month turned into 2. 2 turned into 3. Eventually, we stopped really calculating things. She would contribute when she could. I would handle the rest. And I didn't mind that. At least not at first. When you care about someone, helping them doesn't feel like a burden. But over time, something strange started happening. The more I quietly covered the practical parts of our life, the more Megan talked about wanting to be independent. Not financially, emotionally, socially. Lifestyle independence. The kind of independence where you still live comfortably but insist you're doing everything on your own. It was a contradiction I had noticed but never really challenged. Until now. She was still talking. I just need to reconnect with myself, she said. I think living separately for a bit will help me grow. I nodded again. That makes sense. Her eyebrows pulled together slightly. You're being really calm about this. I'm just listening. Another pause. Most guys would be upset right now. Maybe. You're not. I thought about it for a second. Then I shrugged. If distance is what you need, I said, I can respect that. And in that moment, something shifted. Because I realized something very simple. Megan didn't want to fight. She wanted reassurance. She wanted to say she needed independence, while still knowing everything around her would stay exactly the same. But that wasn't the decision I was quietly making in my head. If Megan wanted independence, I was more than willing to give it to her. Exactly the way she described it. No arguments, no drama, no guilt trips, just calm agreement. She watched me carefully. So you're okay with this? I nodded. Yeah. She exhaled, clearly relieved. Thank you for understanding, she said softly. But what she didn't realize yet was that I wasn't just agreeing with the idea of distance. I was already planning how to make it happen. Completely. Starting that weekend. Because independence isn't just a feeling. It's logistics, bills, responsibilities, and reality. And I had just decided something very simple. If Megan wanted to stand on her own feet, I was going to step completely out of the way. The funny thing about big relationship conversations is that people usually expect a long emotional aftermath. Arguments, late-night talks, complicated negotiations about what the new arrangement will look like. But after Megan said she needed distance, the rest of that evening was almost normal. We finished dinner. We watched half an episode of a show on Netflix. She even fell asleep on the couch for a little while. If you had walked into the apartment that night, you wouldn't have guessed we had just agreed to temporarily stop living together. But in my head, things were already moving forward. Because once someone says they need independence, the next step is pretty obvious. You give it to them. Completely. Friday afternoon, 3 days after the conversation, Megan left to meet one of her friends for coffee. I watched her grab her purse, check herself in the hallway mirror, and head out the door. Don't work too late, she said casually. I won't. The door closed, and the moment it clicked shut, I opened my laptop. Not to scroll social media, not to distract myself, to start organizing something. The logistics of distance. The first thing I did was review every monthly bill connected to our apartment. Internet, streaming services, cloud software, phone plan. Every single one of them was linked to my account. When we had first moved in together, it just made sense for me to handle that stuff. My credit score was higher, my income was stable, and Megan's freelance work came in waves depending on client projects. Back then, she always said the same thing. This is temporary. Once my client list grows, I'll take on more. And I believed her. But over the past year, the arrangement had slowly become permanent. Not through some big decision, just through small habits that never changed. The internet bill automatically came out of my account. The streaming services renewed every month. The software subscriptions renewed annually. And Megan rarely thought about them because she never had to. Which is why the word independence kept echoing in my head. Not in an angry way, just logically. If someone wants independence, you don't partially provide it. You give them the full experience. I opened the account dashboard for the internet provider. There was a small button that said cancel service. The earliest termination date available? Monday morning. That worked. A few clicks later, the cancellation was scheduled. Next came the phone plan. Megan's phone was an extra line under my family account. Removing it took less than 2 minutes. The carrier app even asked a helpful question before finalizing it. Are you sure you want to remove this number from your plan? Yes. Then came the streaming services. Netflix, Spotify, 2 movie platforms. All logged into devices across the apartment. Cancel, cancel, cancel. The quiet apartment filled with the soft clicking sound of my laptop keys. None of it felt dramatic. If anything, it felt surprisingly calm. Because technically, I wasn't doing anything wrong. I wasn't punishing Megan. I was simply removing myself from systems that only existed because we were living as a couple. And if we weren't living that way anymore, those systems didn't really make sense. The last thing on the list was the design software subscription she used for freelance work. That one made me pause for a second. Not because it was difficult to cancel, because I knew how often she used it. Her entire freelance workflow depended on it. But again, independence means handling your own professional tools. I hovered the mouse over the cancellation option for a moment, then clicked it. Done. When Megan got home that evening, she walked into the kitchen carrying 2 iced coffees. "Peace offering," she said with a smile, setting one in front of me. "For what?" "For being cool about everything this week." I took a sip. "Thanks." She seemed lighter than she had earlier in the week, like someone who had just solved a complicated emotional problem. "I've been thinking," she said, leaning against the counter. "About what?" "About how this could actually be really healthy for us." I nodded. "How so?" "Well," she said, "we'll still see each other obviously, just not living together every day. Right? And I think having my own space will really help my creativity." "That makes sense." She took a sip of her drink and continued. "I've also been talking to a few people about maybe getting a small studio apartment somewhere downtown." "Sounds like a good idea." She smiled. "Yeah, it'll be my little independent space." Independent. There was that word again. The strange thing was that she sounded genuinely excited about it. Not worried, not stressed, excited, as if independence was mostly aesthetic. A lifestyle change, a vibe. But real independence has a lot more structure than that. Bills, contracts, utilities, subscriptions. Things that quietly exist in the background of daily life. Things you usually only notice when they disappear. Later that night, we went to bed like we always did. Nothing felt dramatic. Nothing felt final. But while Megan slept peacefully next to me, I knew something she didn't yet, because all the changes I scheduled that afternoon were about to start taking effect. Starting Monday morning. And when they did, Megan's independent life was going to begin a lot sooner than she expected. Not next month. Not after she found the perfect studio apartment. Not after she figured things out. Immediately, exactly the way she asked for it. Because the truth about independence is simple. It sounds great in theory, until the bills start arriving. Monday morning started quietly, almost suspiciously quietly. Megan woke up before me, which wasn't unusual. She liked starting her mornings with coffee and scrolling through emails before opening her design software and getting into work. I heard the familiar sounds from the kitchen, the coffee grinder, the kettle, cabinets opening and closing. For a few minutes everything felt exactly the same as it always had. Then I heard her voice from the living room. "Hey, that's weird." I sat up in bed but didn't answer yet. A few seconds later, she walked into the bedroom holding her phone. "Is the internet acting weird for you?" I rubbed my eyes like I had just woken up. "What do you mean?" "My laptop says there's no connection." I glanced toward the router sitting on the desk near the window. All the lights were off. Right on schedule. "Huh," I said. "That's strange." She frowned and walked over to unplug the router and plug it back in again. Nothing happened. "No lights," she muttered. She tried again. Still nothing. "Maybe the service is down or something," I said casually. "Great," she sighed. "I have 2 client edits due today." She picked up her phone and switched off Wi-Fi. Then her expression changed. "Wait, that's weird." "What?" "My data isn't working either." She stared down at the screen, then tapped it a few times. Then again. "No signal?" I asked. "It says emergency calls only." That part was working exactly as expected. She walked toward the window. Holding her phone up like that might somehow fix the signal. Did the carrier network crash or something? "Maybe," I said. She paced the living room for another minute before grabbing her bag. "I'll just go work from that cafe down the street. Their Wi-Fi is decent." "Good plan." She slipped on her shoes and headed for the door. "Hopefully everything is back when I get home," she said. Hopefully. The door closed behind her. I got up, walked into the kitchen, and made myself coffee. For the first time in a while, the apartment felt incredibly quiet. No laptop fans running. No design software open on the dining table. Just silence. Around 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. Megan. I answered. Hey, what happened to my phone plan? Her voice sounded equal parts confused and irritated. What do you mean? The carrier says my number isn't active anymore. Oh, I took a sip of coffee. Yeah, I removed it from my account. There was a pause. You what? Well, since you said you wanted to live independently, I figured it made sense to separate the shared accounts. Ryan. It's Alex. What? My name. Alex. She corrected quickly, clearly distracted. You can't just cancel my phone. I didn't cancel it. I removed it from my plan. That's basically the same thing. Not really, I said calmly. You can open your own plan anytime. She went quiet for a second. You did this because of the conversation we had? I thought it was the logical step. I didn't mean immediately. I know, I said. But independence usually starts with handling your own services. That's not what I meant. I figured it would make the transition easier. Another pause. Then she asked the question I had been expecting. Did you cancel the internet too? Yes. What? You said you were planning to move out soon anyway. That's not the point. She lowered her voice, probably remembering she was standing in a cafe full of people. I have work to do. I know. My design software isn't working either. That subscription was part of the shared expenses. You canceled that too? Yes. The silence that followed lasted several seconds. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Not angry. Not yet. More like someone who had just realized something important. You planned all this. No, I said calmly. You asked for independence. And you're giving it to me like this? I'm respecting your request. She exhaled sharply. This is ridiculous. Is it? Yes. You said you needed to stand on your own feet. That doesn't mean you cut everything off overnight. I didn't cut anything off, I said. I just removed myself from the shared services. She didn't respond immediately. I could almost hear her thinking through the situation. Then she said something that confirmed exactly what I had suspected. I thought we'd still help each other while we figure things out. And there it was. The expectation. Independence with a safety net. I think this will help the process, I said calmly. You're being petty. I'm being consistent. Another long pause. Finally she said quietly, I need to call the carrier. Okay. And I have to figure out my software again. Sounds like a good place to start. She hung up. I placed my phone back on the table and looked around the apartment. Nothing about the place had changed. The couch was still there. The kitchen still smelled like coffee. But something about the atmosphere had shifted. For the first time since Megan had talked about independence, she was actually experiencing it. And it had only been 4 hours. The real complication, however, was something she hadn't realized yet. Because the internet and phone plan weren't the only things connected to my accounts. The biggest responsibility in the apartment was still coming. And the landlord was scheduled to send the monthly rent reminder in 3 days. Which meant Megan was about to learn something else about independence. It's a lot more expensive than it sounds. For the rest of Monday, things were quiet. No angry messages. No dramatic confrontation. Just silence. Which honestly surprised me a little. I assumed Megan would call again once the reality of everything sank in. But instead the apartment stayed calm all afternoon. Around 6 in the evening, I heard the front door unlock. She walked in slowly, dropped her bag on the chair near the entrance, and stood there for a moment without saying anything. I was sitting at the dining table with my laptop open. How was the cafe? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead she walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and leaned against the counter. It took 3 hours to set up a new phone plan, she said finally. Sounds annoying. It is. She took a long drink. And the data is terrible. That happens with new plans sometimes. She looked at me, not angry, but definitely not happy. You really went through with it. I told you I would support your independence. That's not what support looks like. What does it look like? She didn't answer that question. Instead, she changed the subject. The internet company says the service was canceled this morning. Yeah. You could have warned me. I figured you were preparing to move out anyway. That doesn't mean I wanted to lose my connection before I found a place. You'll probably get your own set up soon. She stared at me for a few seconds like she was trying to figure out whether I was being serious or sarcastic. But the truth was I wasn't doing either. I was just responding calmly. Eventually she sighed and walked toward the couch. I had to hotspot from my new phone all day just to send files. That's rough. And the design software subscription expired. That was under my account. I know that. Another pause. I had to download a trial version just to finish one project. That's a good temporary solution. She rubbed her temples. Do you realize how complicated today was? I can imagine. The frustration on her face grew more visible. I don't think you can. She sat down across from me at the table. I didn't think you'd do all of this immediately. I thought you wanted a clean start. I meant emotionally. I assumed you meant practically too. Her jaw tightened slightly. You're being extremely literal. I'm trying to be helpful. That made her laugh once. But it wasn't a happy laugh. Helpful, she repeated. Yes. How exactly is any of this helpful? I leaned back in my chair. Well, I said calmly, now you're already getting used to managing your own services. That's not the point, isn't it? No, she crossed her arms. The point was creating space in the relationship. And you have space. That's not what I meant. I know. She stared at me again. And for a moment, I could see the gears turning in her head. Because what she had imagined when she asked for independence was very different from what was actually happening. In her mind, independence meant emotional freedom, more time with friends, more personal space, more flexibility. But the infrastructure of our shared life, the bills, the services, the logistics, had quietly been handled by me for a long time. And now those things were gone, which meant independence suddenly required a lot more effort. Finally, she said something quieter. I thought we'd still function like a couple while figuring this out. That seemed confusing. How? You can't really be independent while someone else handles your living expenses. I never asked you to stop helping. You didn't have to. The room went quiet again. Then she stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the city was already getting dark. Cars moved slowly through the streetlights below. After a moment, she spoke again. I'm looking at studio apartments tomorrow. That's a good step. They're expensive. Most places are right now. I'll probably need to put down a deposit. That's normal. She turned back toward me. You're not offering to help. No. Another pause. I thought you cared about me. I do. Then why are you acting like this? I'm respecting your decision. That's not respect, she said. It feels like punishment. I'm not punishing you. It feels like it. I'm just stepping back. Her frustration started to rise again. You didn't have to cancel everything all at once. I thought it would make things simpler. For who? For both of us. She shook her head slowly. You really think this is simple? I think it's clear. She looked like she wanted to argue again. But then something else interrupted the moment. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down at the screen, then frowned. What? I asked. It's the landlord. Oh. She opened the message and read it. Then her expression changed. What does it say? I asked. She looked up at me. The rent reminder for this month. That sounds normal. She kept staring at the phone. The full amount is due in 3 days. I nodded. Yeah. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Why did he send it to me? Because I updated the contact information this morning. The silence that followed was heavier than anything else that had happened that day. What do you mean you updated it? Well, I said calmly, since you're staying here while figuring things out, it made sense for the landlord to communicate directly with you. Her voice dropped. Alex, the rent here is $2,400. I know. You used to pay most of that. Yes. She stared at me like she had just realized something she hadn't considered before. You're not paying it this month. No. And for the first time since this whole situation started, Megan looked genuinely shocked. Because independence had suddenly reached the part nobody likes talking about. The bills. For a few seconds, Megan didn't say anything. She just stood there staring at her phone like the message might change if she read it again. The rent here is $2,400, she repeated slowly. I know, I said. Her eyes moved from the phone to me. You used to cover most of that. Yes. And now you're not? No. The quiet that followed was different from the earlier pauses we'd had that day. Before, she had been annoyed. Now she looked genuinely confused. Alex, she said carefully, we never talked about this. We talked about independence. That's not the same thing. It usually is. She set the phone down on the table and sat across from me again. You can't just drop something like this on me 3 days before rent is due. I didn't drop it on you, I said calmly. You asked for a different living situation. I said I wanted some distance. And you're getting it. She rubbed her forehead again. You're twisting what I said. I don't think I am. Yes, you are. Her voice rose slightly. Then she caught herself and lowered it again. I thought we were transitioning. What does that mean exactly? It means we take some time to figure things out without blowing everything up. I'm not blowing anything up. You canceled half our life in one day. I separated the parts that were connected to me. That's basically the same thing. I shrugged slightly. It's part of becoming independent. She leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling for a moment. Then she looked back at me. You seriously expect me to pay the full rent here? You're the one living here. You live here too. Not anymore. That was the first time I had actually said it out loud. Her eyes narrowed again. What do you mean not anymore? I signed a short-term lease for another place this morning. That sentence landed like a brick. You what? It's a small apartment across town, month to month. When were you planning to tell me that? I figured it would come up. You're moving out? Yes. Already? Yes. Her mouth opened slightly like she was about to argue again, but no words came out. You planned this, she said after a moment. I planned to respect your request. That's not respecting it. What would respecting it look like? You staying here while we figure things out. That didn't seem like distance. It's emotional distance. But still sharing the same apartment. Yes. And the same bills. She didn't answer, because that was the part that didn't quite fit. Megan had imagined independence in a very specific way. The emotional version. More space. More freedom. More individuality. But the physical structure of our life, the apartment, the services, the finances, had quietly stayed the same in her mind. And now that structure was changing faster than she expected. So what happens now? She asked. Well, I said, the lease here is technically month to month after this cycle. So you're just leaving me with it? You said you wanted your own space. That doesn't mean I wanted the entire financial responsibility overnight. I assumed you were preparing for that. I was preparing to move. And now you can. She laughed again. That same sharp, frustrated laugh from earlier. You think it's that simple? I think it's straightforward. No, Alex, it's not. She grabbed her phone again and started scrolling through something. You know what the cheapest studio I found today costs? How much? $1,900 a month. That's pretty standard for downtown. Plus a deposit. That's normal. Plus utilities. That too. She dropped the phone back onto the table. I don't have that kind of money ready. You've been talking about independence for months. That doesn't mean I expected everything to shift in 1 week. I figured it would make the transition clearer. Clearer for who? For both of us. She stared at me again. You really don't see how extreme this is. I see it as practical. You're acting like we broke up. I thought distance meant separating our lives. That's not what I meant. I know. She leaned forward slightly. You're doing this because you're mad. I'm not mad. Yes, you are. No. Then why are you making everything harder? I'm not. She shook her head slowly. You know what this feels like? What? Like you're trying to prove a point. I thought about that for a moment. Then I answered honestly. I'm trying to make things real. Real. Yes. What does that even mean? It means independence isn't just a concept. She didn't respond. So I continued. It's responsibility. Bills. Services. Contracts. All the things that keep daily life running. She sat there quietly while I spoke. You said you wanted to stand on your own feet. I finished. I'm giving you the space to do that. Her expression shifted again. Not angry this time. Not confused either. Something closer to uneasy. Because she was starting to realize something important. The life we had been living together was built on a lot of invisible support systems. And most of those systems had my name attached to them. After a long moment she asked quietly, "When are you leaving?" "Saturday." "That's 4 days." "Yeah." She looked around the apartment. The couch, the shelves, the kitchen, everything that had quietly become part of our shared routine. "You're really going through with this?" "Yes." Another long silence settled over the room. Finally she said something almost to herself. "I thought this would be easier." I nodded. Most people do. But the truth was, things were about to get even more complicated. Because Megan still didn't know something else I had already taken care of earlier that morning. And when she found out, the situation was going to change again. Tuesday evening the apartment felt different. Not louder, not tenser, just heavier. Megan spent most of the day outside again, working from cafes and apartment hunting between client calls. When she came home, she looked exhausted. "Every place wants a deposit and first month up front," she said, dropping her bag. "That's pretty normal." "I know. I just didn't realize how fast it adds up." She sat down at the kitchen table and started scrolling through listings again. Then she stopped. "Wait. What's this?" "What?" "The electricity account." "Oh, right," I said. "I transferred that earlier today." "You what?" "Well, since I'm moving out Saturday, it made sense for the utilities to stay with the person living here." She stared at the screen. "Alex, the deposit alone is $400. "Yeah." And that was the moment Megan realized something important. Independence wasn't just expensive. It was constant. By Wednesday morning, the reality had fully set in. Megan sat at the kitchen table surrounded by notes, apartment listings, and half-finished coffee. She looked tired. Not angry anymore, just overwhelmed. "I didn't think everything would change this fast," she said quietly. "You asked for independence." "I know. But I thought we'd ease into it." "That usually doesn't work." She sighed and leaned back in her chair. "I spent the entire morning calculating expenses. And if I take the studio I saw yesterday, almost my entire freelance income goes to rent. That's part of living alone." She looked at me again. "For the first time, I'm actually scared." I nodded slowly, because independence always sounds empowering in theory. But in practice, it starts with numbers.